Okay, let's dive right into this one. If you're a student, or really if you're just anyone who gets into conversations about big ideas, you've probably heard this line before. It's one of those classic zingers against religious belief. So, in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly why that statement isn't nearly as smart as it sounds. The goal here is to give you some real confidence and clarity, so you don't have to feel embarrassed or caught off guard when it comes up. All right, first things first. Let's just slow down and actually look at what's being claimed here. We need to unpack the logic that's hiding underneath that catchy slogan. Okay, so what's super interesting here is how this whole thing splits into two totally different questions. You see, the slogan itself, it's not actually an argument about whether God is real. It's a psychological guess about why people believe. And think about it. Someone's reason for believing something doesn't tell you a single thing about whether that belief is actually true or false. So here's the core problem, right? It's all about confusing a feeling with a fact. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine someone told you, hey, you only believe your parents love you because it makes you feel safe. Okay, maybe it does make you feel safe, but does that prove their love isn't real? Of course not. It's the exact same thing here. Saying faith gives people hope might be true, but it completely dodges the main event, the big question: is God actually real? All right, so this brings us to the first huge logical mistake in this whole argument. There's this hidden assumption packed inside it, and it's this: if a belief is comforting, then it must be fake. But just stop and think about that for a second. Is that really how we figure out what's true? No way. I mean, look at these examples. Believing oxygen exists is super comforting, right? But that doesn't make it a fantasy. Knowing your friendships are real is one of the best feelings ever, but it doesn't mean your friends are imaginary. So it's pretty clear. Comfort is just a terrible, terrible test for what's true. So when someone throws that line at you, you just believe for comfort, this question right here is a perfect, calm, and logical way to respond. It just neatly shifts the whole conversation away from somebody's feelings and puts it right back where it belongs, on the actual question of what's true. But wait, it gets even better. There's a much deeper problem with this whole comfort argument. See, if you're going to make a rule that says comforting beliefs are suspicious, then you have to apply that rule to everyone. And when you do that, well, it becomes a real double-edged sword. This is exactly what I mean. Yeah, okay, someone could argue that a believer wishes for comfort and meaning. Fair enough. But couldn't you just as easily argue that an atheist wishes there was no God, no ultimate judgment, no one to be accountable to? I mean, that sounds pretty comforting too, doesn't it? So if we're calling out wish fulfillment, then disbelief could be just as guilty as belief. The whole argument just collapses on itself. You know, there's actually a name for this. The writer C.S. Lewis called this exact logical fallacy Bulverism. It's basically this mental shortcut where you just assume the other person is wrong, and then you spend all your time explaining why they're so silly instead of actually dealing with their argument. And here are the steps, plain and simple. First, you just assume they're wrong. No proof needed. Then, you play armchair psychologist and explain away their silly belief. And in the process, you never, ever have to engage with their actual reasons or evidence. The whole "God is a crutch" slogan, it's a perfect textbook example of this. So let's pause here for a second and ask a totally different question. What if we've been looking at this whole thing completely backwards? What if that deep, nagging desire for hope inside all of us isn't proof that God is a fairy tale, but is actually a clue that we were made for something more? Now, stick with me here because this is where we get way beyond a simple social media comeback. Yeah, this completely flips the script. Instead of seeing our desire for hope as some kind of psychological weakness, what if we saw it as a signpost? A signpost that's pointing us towards something or someone real. This is the heart of what's often called the argument from desire, something C.S. Lewis wrote about a lot. His point was pretty simple. Think about it. Every natural, innate desire we have, like hunger or thirst, points to a real thing that satisfies it, like food and water. But then he pointed out that we humans also have this other desire, this deep, profound longing for meaning and hope and joy that, if we're honest, nothing on this earth ever fully satisfies. For Lewis, that wasn't a problem. It was a giant clue that maybe we were made for another reality, for a relationship with God. And what's really fascinating is that modern research kind of backs this up. I mean, study after study shows a positive link between sincere religious faith and things like hope, a sense of meaning, and even resilience. Now, does that prove God exists on its own? No, but it is exactly what you would expect to find if the Christian story is true, if we really were designed for a relationship with God. Okay, so let's bring this all home and make it super practical. The next time you're in a conversation and someone says, God is just made up to give people hope, you really don't have to panic or get angry. There is a really calm, thoughtful way to keep the conversation going. Think of these points as your toolkit for that conversation. First, you can just gently separate the reason for belief from the truth of the belief. Second, you can point out that, hey, lots of true things are comforting. And third, you can open the door to talk about the actual reasons people believe, from science, from history. The whole point here isn't to win a fight, it's to start a real, honest conversation. So when it comes right down to it, just remember, that slogan isn't some scientific fact they discovered in a lab. It's just a guess about what's going on in someone's head. At the end of the day, the Christian faith isn't grounded in a wish. It's grounded in a real God who Christians believe actually stepped into our history. And that leads us to this final question. It's a great way to totally reframe the discussion. When you ask this, you're calmly shifting the burden of proof and inviting them to move past psychological guesses and into a real conversation about evidence. And that's always, always a better place to be.